welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. I'm joined for the final time in 2022 by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, this is it. Boxing Day upon us, the holidays upon us, Christmas obviously upon us, various holidays. Time for reflection, a time to look back at this crazy year one final time. I mean, I call it a crazy year, but they just keep getting worse almost, I feel like, from 2020 onwards. So who knows what will await us, but this episode is for 2022 and some fireside chats, some conversations that we've been meaning to have.
Indeed so. It's nice to sit down with a glass of scotch, perhaps. A brandy, if you will, for a nice fireside chat. It's not often we actually get the chance to chat about non-tennis related things on an episode of Open Era, Dev. I know it somehow makes its way in there, or sometimes makes its way in there, but in general, for this Christmas episode, I figured it'd be a nice chance for us to sit down and actually just have a chat together and see how we've both been doing through this, as you say, not great 2022. Probably more bad than good overall, and it feels like that's the direction of the world for the next few years, doesn't it? Which is not exactly the most cheery way to start this episode, but it's kind of true, isn't it?
Well, I definitely feel like there is a bit of a World Cup malaise happening instantly, and various sicknesses going around. The non-COVID illness joke that's been basically used by professional teams throughout since the COVID era began, that people in real life are having these non-COVID illness bouts. Bush, it's just... It's a funny way to end the year, but everyone getting sick as we end a pretty dubious World Cup. It feels like it's a bit of an ominous end to the year. I'm trying to be a bit more positive, but yeah, that's where I net out after being mesmerized by the Messi testimonial that was the World Cup.
Yeah, okay. Let's start there then. That seems like a good place for it, because it's been an interesting World Cup for you as well, having to work it and having to do a bunch of stuff that you... I guess that's the question, isn't it? Have you been able to enjoy this World Cup? For many reasons. Not just the fact that you were working it, but all the other stuff that goes with it.
I think the issue is, like, I did. And I don't know if I'd be honest if I said I didn't have a really good time watching soccer from basically 5 a.m. till 5 p.m. every day. And that group stage rush that you get, it came back in a big way, and Canada was involved. And yeah, I think the fact that I was working and covering it with our shows and feeling really immersed in it, it led me to probably shelve some of my prior complaints with the whole setup of the tournament and why it was there. And I had watched that FIFA documentary on Netflix recently as well, so there was no illusions here. And I just listening to people that I really respected, like Arsene Wenger, who, if you know my soccer background, I'm a big Arsenal fan, and Wenger is the godfather. But listening to him now talk about things, especially talking about FIFA because he works for them, it's like, well, yeah, anything can be bought, I guess, right? Like, that's basically it. So I had a really good time watching it, but I guess with it over now, and maybe that hangover hitting where it's like, oh yeah, like this took the toll for this was a lot of human lives and a lot of people having their entire way of being upended to put on a show. And the show was great, but yeah, it doesn't leave a completely great taste in my mouth.
Kind of interesting as well, because I took a walk through Stratford in East London a couple of weeks ago, and then did the same thing in Barcelona last weekend to walk through the Olympic Village. And I know they're not the same thing, but more or less, right? It's the World Cup and Olympics follow the same sort of path in terms of setting up facilities and infrastructure and then seeing the state of them afterwards. And then who knows what the state of Qatar is going to be afterwards. I mean, they've already started dismantling one of the stadiums, and you're dealing with a state which is the size of London, or Greater London, in terms of its overall size. I don't know, man. Like, this whole thing feels extremely hollow, and I think you got to say that FIFA and everyone involved got extremely lucky that the final turned out the way it did, because otherwise there might be more heads turning towards it. Well,
I mean, like, I think we laugh as hockey fans when the commissioner, Gary Bettman, who I know does not have many fans out there, when he presents the trophy at the end and people are booing him, it's one of, like, the cathartic, like, yeah, like this still matters and we still have a voice and we can say how we feel. And when Infantino's doing it and basically making Messi stand beside him and whispering him sweet whatevers while Messi clearly wants to go and and celebrate. I was like, okay, yeah, it's all the same. Like we've reached a crescendo. Like it kind of leads into something we were going to talk about, but like our biggest takeaways from sport in general this year. But it's that balance. It's that ability to find some things that you can still latch onto while acknowledging that so much of this is manufactured and fake and exploiting a ton of people for cash and for marketing purposes. So it was a proper end as well, Bush, as we're deep into the tennis exhibition season, where we lament how little time these players have to recover, and yet they're collecting checks in every place they can, no matter who the people are who are giving them the checks. So that's the general vibe as we start this fireside chat is a bit bleak, I will admit.
But I think it's just being realistic, is it not, for the state of the world in general? And sport.
I guess.
Mentioned Arsene Wenger. I mean, goodness gracious me, going from someone that I had massive respect for in terms of his views on the sport and just in general as well. I think just having a good voice, that elderly grandfather kind of figure, and then just to see him being bought and paid for the way that he is, pretty awful look in general for the former Arsenal head coach, Dev.
Head coach, yeah.
Should we move on swiftly from that and chat about something else? I mean, you mentioned that the tennis season is kind of continuing on as we're sitting here on Boxing Day. Is that we were discussing with our producer before recording this podcast that the idea of coming back and finding a schedule in the new year, and just the realization that by the time we start recording again and getting up in episodes in 2023, it's the Australian Open already. Like, there's no time to breathe in this damn sport.
No, it's a bit wild. And I think what's happening now, and you have like the World Tennis League, which, like, if you can explain that to me, what it is quick, like within 5 minutes without having to pull out binders, I will applaud you. But
binders of women, if you will.
Binders, literally, the WTA case for these matches. But Iga's playing, and I'm like, this is cool. And I've been seeing some interviews with some of the people in Australia who will be the story in a few weeks' time, and it's about who's going to kick on after Iga and who's going to take that mantle from Serena and really solidify the women's tour and make it top heavy in a bigger way. Even though we talk about how there's 20 players who can win every given week, they're looking for these new stars. And I think to go back to what I was talking about in terms of like the marketing and like how lucky FIFA was, no one's really had to come up with any new good ideas recently, because we've had just a bunch of generational stars everywhere who are able to basically blind us from the harsh realities with their greatest abilities. It's like a Messi doing his thing, Nadal doing his thing this year when you really did not think it was possible. The end of Federer, the end of Serena Williams, Novak coming back and winning a slam where he played basically for like 12 weeks. They keep banking on these performances, and I do think what this year is also exposed to me in a bigger way is that we are so reliant on these individuals, because the ideas that are being generated perhaps by the brain trusts of these leagues and sports, like I don't know if they're behind or they're also just unable to predict what's going to come, because the way we watch these things are impossible now with the streaming services and the fact that everything is decentralized to an incredible extent where you have to pay $150 a month if you want to legally watch these sports. I don't know, Si. That was a rambling meander there, but I hit on what's currently my 2022 wrap thoughts.
I walked past in downtown Paris two really interesting things. One was an esports training facility, basically. It was a shop front that was just full of people playing, I think it was League of Legends, and it was absolutely packed. It was massively packed. It must have been 100 people in there. And just a realization that you get outside of North America and you get into certain parts of Europe, and it's such an enormous deal. I mean, it's a huge deal in North America as well, but just in different capacities, seeing it in your face. And then the second part of it was going to see a bar and being in a sort of cafe/bar, and it being esports theme as well. And just seeing the people that were visiting it and seeing esports on the television, which would historically have been a sports bar, would have been showing something equivalent of it. And this is during the World Cup. And me just sitting there being like, yeah, it's entirely understandable that this is the case, and that you've basically had a whole generation of kids growing up with sport being inaccessible, except if you had lots of money, or alternatively, if you were fortunate enough to be able to figure out how to get access to some of these sports. Esports are just so much easier to find. It's just so much more straightforward to click onto these things, and then just to see the way that manifested itself in the streets of Paris, I thought was really kind of fascinating.
It's fascinating. This Netflix documentary that's coming out in January to coincide with the return of the tour and the players they're highlighting. Like, I think this has been something that so many people have been looking forward to because of the F1 series push, and a way to maybe drive a new generation of fans to the sport. I'm glad I saw certain people highlighted, Iga Swiatek being the main person, that I think her story being told by people who have that ability to tell it well will be only positive for the sport, combined with the fact that Nick Kyrgios seems to be a focal point as well. It's A, I'm not surprised, and B, I get it, but C, like I have a feeling where this is going to go, where I know what to expect, and I'm excited, frankly, to see some of the behind-the-scenes stuff or see what they were able to capture, but also a bit trepidatious about this new push that will be made, I think, to make Kyrgios one of the faces of the game for basically all the reasons we talked about this year. I mean, the latest reason being him being shocked and appalled that Ash Barty was still rated the better tennis player from Australia this season instead of him, and him having the inability to just even fathom that. It's going to be a long year in that regard, Simon, because this is the play. This is the play post Roger, post Serena, post Rafa and Novak eventually. This is where they're going to have to go all in and make some big calls. And if this is the direction, this will be interesting.
This is a break point, if you will, for the sport. Come on.
Jesus Christ.
Terrible. I'm actually not I'm not going to shit on this thing yet at all. Like, I want to watch it.
I want to watch it. Exactly. I want to see it first before I make any bold proclamations. But I did think that just reading the list of players highlighted per episode was very fascinating, because I think it gives us a glimpse into what probably not some focus groups, but some people who are tasked with telling them who to focus on. This is who they pointed out, for good and bad.
Yeah, I would hazard a guess and say that I think this might be the most watched Australian Open in history, with the Netflix series going into it, just simply because this is where people's attention is at. And I think you saw the almost instantaneous effect that Drive to Survive had on F1. It's interesting the kind of people that are going to be brought into the sport, though, because I think so often we look at Drive to Survive and the crowd that watches Drive to Survive, and it's like, oh, it's so diverse. And then you look at the data and you think, like, actually, it's just a bunch of rich people. It's just a bunch of, like, rich people who didn't previously watch sport, who got invested in watching the exploits of other rich people. So I wonder whether or not that's going to follow suit in tennis as well, because I don't think tennis players are as rich as F1 drivers, right, unless I'm sadly mistaken here.
And like the whole, I find it like a lot of my friends ended up going to the Montreal race after getting either A, they were lapsed fans who hadn't really followed it for a while, or B, they were totally interested or intrigued by the Netflix series. And the whole trip was to go to Montreal and spend a boatload of cash. And it's like, that's F1, baby. Let's get some gear. Woo!
Loki, it's got to be said, by the way, F1, not a good watch at all. It's a very, very poor watch, but I'm glad that people like it.
And I'm a fan. I'm a fan myself. I just found it interesting that the whole pilgrimage aspect of going to an event is to go and spend heaps of cash on merchandise, basically, which...
Is that not the same thing as everything, though, Dev?
It's true. No, it's true. It's true. What's the difference between a jersey at a game and that, or a bucket hat at the local tennis tournament that I was so close to buying because I wanted one, but I'm like, what am I doing? What is happening? What was the markup here? Is this necessary?
Like, secretly, what we should be advocating for is nationalizing the ATP and WTA tours. That's what we should, or make it fan-owned so that wealth trickles down in that regard.
Maybe we'll take part 2 into the more personal vein, but it's on the sports level. Bush, what was your defining moment? What was the sports thing that will stand the test of time for you? I'm sure there's a few, but...
Tons of them, yeah. I think it's going to be difficult for me to... I know it's going to sound ridiculous, but it's going to be difficult for me to top watching Roger Federer retire. And I know we already covered it.
Yeah. And you were trying to be cool about it. You were trying to be like, I'm going to miss the guy, but life goes on. But I could see secretly, internally, you were melting away.
Well, I think, how many episodes of this show have we done? This will be 170 episodes of this. And then we did probably another 30 of the Sport Chronicle related to tennis. So that's 200 episodes dedicated towards the sport. And I think when you find a player who's been so instrumental in, but I think both of our sports watching and getting into this sport, to see that person retire, it's a huge deal. And I don't think I've quite come to terms with the fact that he's fully left the sport yet, even though it's been obvious for a very long time, and we've kind of known he's been retired for a decent length of time. But like, to actually feel the emotional impact of that, it's I don't know, Dev. It sounds ridiculous, but it's kind of a weird sensation.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we would have done this podcast without Roger Federer, right? Like, I don't think that's something that someone that we bonded over and where our friendship almost began. So I think that there was a lot of different things that flowed into my emotions watching the end of it. And obviously Nadal and Federer bawling their eyes out hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was allowed to do that, but them are legends with that 20-hour Ellie Goulding concert going on in the background. It all again once again felt really bizarre and surreal in many ways, but truly the end of something for me, because I think as much as I will obviously continue to watch tennis and follow new players and follow current players that have already captured our attention, it will be different. It will definitely be different, and I think it's the same with Serena as well, where it does feel like there's an impetus on the people in charge for me to get things right, Bush, and to maybe use this opportunity with this kind of chasm created to fix the things that we've been talking about for quite a while, whether that be the equal representation amongst the tours in terms of scheduling at the big tournaments, or whether that be actually finding ways to demonstrate to the world why Iga Swiatek is the top women's player in tennis, but also one of the best athletes in the world. Like, I want to see some real tangible improvements there next year, and maybe this chance to fill some holes will give them an opportunity there.
Let me ask you this question at the top, as we can probably close this segment on the sporting side of things. Does tennis have the most big stories out of any sport?
I heard someone describing this the other day, Bush, and it was about records or comparing records across sports, but consider that tennis basically has like 4 Super Bowls a year, right? Mm-hmm. They're really one of the few sports. I think obviously golf is included as well, but it's golf. It's golf, and also golf's really hard, and the way it's set up, like you're going to get there's going to be more randomness, I think, involved just because of the way their tournaments are structured. But there's 4 Super Bowls a year, there's 4 Stanley Cups a year. That fact, imagine that LeBron could win 4 times in one season, or like imagine the storylines that would build there. So it's something that they have in their back pocket that very few other entities do have. Because even if you look at the other individual sports, F1, like there's how many races are there, right? Like if you look at maybe some of the more European sports, especially league play, there's a lot of games. Like there's a lot of things that maybe fade in importance because they're just another match on November 12th or something. There's not something special about that, but tennis definitely has that in their pocket, man.
I mean, just looking at on the surface of it, you had Novak Djokovic being deported from Australia, which was international news. You had Russians and Belarusians being banned from Wimbledon, which again, international news. You had Roger Federer and Serena Williams retire at the end of the year. Obviously massive news. You had Rafael Nadal winning 2 Grand Slams in coming back from being dead. Amazing, incredible news. You had Ashley Barty retire mid-season, who was the world number 1. That's obviously massive news. I mean, what else am I missing? There's more, right? There's more stuff that I forgot to even mention, and that's like an incredible...
Canada won the Davis Cup, which is pretty cool. Gerard Piqué's e-transferring me my cut for mentioning that tournament. But
Carlos Alcaraz, Iga Swiatek, right? The 2 world number 1s, like coming out of not nowhere, but like cementing their place at the top. That's oversized news as well. Like it's astonishing. I mean, like there's big stuff this year, but in general, kind of a down year for sport. I think the World Cup kind of saved it because I don't really have much memory of what happened at the Winter Olympics. bit of a damp squib NBA Finals, NFL, Super Bowl. I mean, who really cares about the LA Rams? Who even won?
Oh, I had a hard time remembering there was an Olympics this year, to be frank, until you just reminded me. Oh yeah, that happened. Goodness gracious. Yeah.
Let's move on. Sports done, man. You shut it down. As we head into part 2 of our fireside chat on this lovely Boxing Day, we'll get a bit more personal and chat about how each of our respective years have been. Join us for a glass of brandy on the other side. Chat to you then. Welcome back to the Open Era Podcast, our final episode of 2022. It's Boxing Day, maybe a little laughter. Hopefully you're still enjoying some Christmas time, the holiday spirit. Dev, how are you doing? How's your year been? Let's start with that one. In general, how are you doing personally?
I was thinking back to where I was at 1 year ago, and my jaw was extreme pain as I was trying to talk on this podcast, and we were like, oh my god, this is something else. This doesn't feel right. But yeah, I would say in many ways it was a positive year. I think on a personal level, and I think I had a lot of concerns about where I would be post job break, and especially considering how much I like talking about sports in general. That's part of my life, I would say, in many ways. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do that. And just thinking back to those times and the all liquid diet, I really got attached to Ensure, those protein shakes, those supplements that really were a life force for me. Again, not an ad like the Davis Cup shout out was, but I was just thinking back to how different my life was at the start of this year, and the kind of positive trajectory I took in many ways on a personal level with relationships and trying new things and taking a new job on. Like, I'm pretty thankful for a lot, but it's just an interesting thing to me to backdrop that on the fact that overall it feels like living in cities is becoming untenable, and inflation is in just a ridiculous state, and everything costs more, and it's getting harder and harder to get by. But it's also been a positive year overall push. So positives and negatives, like we've been saying for the first 20 minutes of this show, it's kind of a common theme.
Yeah, I think we kind of sit in that treading water territory, don't we? Where, yes, inflation is eating away at what our salaries are, but we're relatively fortunate that we only pay 40% of our salary towards rent, possibly 50.
right. If you're lucky, yeah.
Yeah, it's not quite 90%. Yeah, those days are coming in the near future.
No, it's bad, man, and I think it's leading. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, and a bunch of people moved away from the cities because they didn't have to be here for work, and that obviously flipped with a bunch of workplaces now enforcing different rules, and I mean, who knows what that's going to happen regarding that in the future. But I think the other thing you're seeing is that people aren't choosing to leave the city because they don't have to be here. They're choosing to leave it because they can't really stay here. And this is not just a Toronto or a Vancouver thing. It's in a lot of places. I'm curious, how has it been changing your location push to Europe during this time? Because I know on a personal level, you've had some changes as well, and I think it's no small one to move across the world.
I feel like I need to write a thesis at some point about my thoughts of just being in Europe, having lived in North America. So I go back and forth on all of this. I had a friend of mine, we were chatting before I left Vancouver, and he had recently come back from, I think he'd spent nearly 2 months in Toulouse, so in South France. And he was basically, because he grew up in Latin America, he grew up in Chile, and basically he was saying, like, once you spend a bit of time in North America, you forget what living in a country that is more community oriented and is just more socialist in general, puts more premium on family and puts more premium on like less individualistic behavior. And I thought like it was just him saying stuff, right? And just
yeah, you're like, all right, man.
Yeah, whatever you say.
So you had a good time in Toulouse, relax.
All right, south of France, I'm sure it was very nice, but there's no need to rub it in. Vancouver's pretty nice as well, it's okay. And then like and then I did it myself, right? And then I came to London, and then I came to Paris, and then I went to Barcelona just to get a sample of all these places. And I've got to say, he's kind of true. It's kind of interesting to go back into spaces after, and you almost feel like you're brainwashed, like the being isolated and being so like consumerist and like feeling like your only outlet is what you buy and how you present to the world. And the first thing that people always say to you is like, what do you do for work? And then it's like, oh, for fuck's sake, do we have to go down this road again? And you just have a conversation as normal people. So it's been kind of nice actually just to see the reverse of that. And then walking around Paris and walking around Spain and just being so close to other people who are just stopping and spending time talking to each other. It's kind of fascinating to be around the infrastructure where people are in the middle of a melting pot and it's not all hustle and bustle and elbows and pushing each other out the way. And I think that's kind of signified most in a really weird way. And stop me if this sounds too ridiculous, but people just walk slower here. Like people just walk slower and not
all right. I
not
know.
in so much of a rush.
As someone who has been identified as a fast walker, quote unquote, I feel like I'd be sanctioned for my speed. But I know what you mean. Maybe Europe is better equipped to, or depending on where you are, of course, but maybe you're better equipped to head back into that more community sense of the world post everything that's happened. Because an underrated aspect of this all, or everything that's happened, quote, TM, we should trademark that because I've said it about 14 times, but people are finding it really hard to get back into that social setting and get back into the way it was and get out of those patterns of isolation that I think we were forced into for various reasons, including a major health disaster that required some pretty drastic changes. And finding your way out of that, I underestimated how much people would be affected. Again, I see it as I'm commuting more into the office and seeing that I think the resources that were already pretty lackluster beforehand seem to be less prevalent after for the people who are most in need and who are people who are suffering through some pretty major mental health issues and not having any sort of support. Like it feels like everyone is having a really hard time adjusting to what has happened in a general sense. And I wonder by Europe and the places you've been, Bush, having those values entrenched beforehand, it's been easier for them to get back to that way of life, even though I'm sure it hasn't been easy.
Well, just your infrastructure is all right. It's just easier to walk to places. Everything's closer together in that sense as well. So you're not like you're living in a suburb and feeling more isolated. I mean, even downtown Toronto, I think is a little different. Same with downtown Vancouver. But even if you get outside of the downtown area of Vancouver, you're still having to drive places, right? It's not like you can just walk to a friend's house or do that kind of easy level commute. You're still having to go somewhere. And I think one of the most interesting parts of going to Barcelona and seeing it is just to be in a city that is admittedly incredibly unaffordable for the most part, but you still have multi-generational families inside of the city itself. And just the realization that that's not the case in North America because it's too fucking expensive for, your grandparents, the parents, and the kids to all live in the same space. It's becoming more of a rarity, and just seeing like older people walking around here with their grandchildren, and it's not like an uncommon sight. It's everywhere. It's literally every fucking street that you walk down. And it's one of those weird sort of side effects of living in North America that you become blind to that fact that it's not the case in most cities.
Yeah, I mean like imagine you have a childcare option within your own house, and you're not spending pretty striking fees on that, which I know is another huge factor for young families in Toronto, at least. Yeah, you're convincing me, sir. You're convincing me to go to Europe, but overall, I mean, so you're a few months into this journey, plus taking on a new job and taking on new responsibilities. That balance that maybe they're finding a better work version of in Europe. I'm curious how you found it adjusting from the hustle and bustle of North America.
Lots to discuss in that regard. I think like I said before, like that individualism element that exists in North America. And I think we have a mutual friend on this who originally grew up in Colombia, And any chance you get, it's like, I fucking hate how capitalist North America is.
JB
I agree
forever.
with that.
JB
Exactly.
forever, of course. Yeah.
Nothing but love hearts going in that direction. But I think it's legitimately true. Like if you grew up or around a place that was more community oriented and you had like friends in walking distance, or like it was more a part of the sort of infrastructure that you grew up in, and then you stepped out of that and did North America like I did, you kind of you lose sight of what that looks like and what that feels like. And that like distance thing that you're talking about, I think that's built into the infrastructure of North America, which is a problem. It's funny because I was talking to some people, some of my colleagues, and to a T, like their answer of like, why do you not want to go into the office? Like, it's too far to commute. I wouldn't mind going in, but it's just too far, and I'm not doing like 40 minutes in either direction. And it's a damning indication of how things have been built and how things are in general. Is that it's too expensive to live and work within a 5-minute walk. For the most part, it's too damn expensive to do that. Or alternatively, like the way that our cities have been constructed in North America, it's just impossible to find the rental cost for a business to be able to do that either. Or if it is the case, you're very lucky, and you should welcome that with open arms, because I think most people that I've spoken to in my neck of the woods from like the business that I work in is just, yeah, I mean, we love spending time with each other. It's kind of nice to get the chance to do that, but it's too far away, and we need still some flexibility in our lives. Like, it can't still revolve around a regular 9 to 5 in an office. It has to be like, some days you can be there and some days you can't be. And it's just an evolution of the work industry that I think is going to take a while to catch up in general.
It's true. We had 2 pretty big elections here in the last year, the provincial Ontario election and then our local Toronto elections. And the decisions made by the majority, and I use that term loosely because the turnout, I think, for the provincial one was quite low, was that people were like, well, can we do things better? Is it hard? Yeah. And that's kind of been the common denominator. And it's made me, I'm getting angrier noticing the deficiencies we have in these matters, Bush, like the infrastructure, the transportation, the fact that we have streetcars timed to have 4 of them crawling along side by side together, basically, and then a 25-minute gap afterwards. Things like that you would assume would be part of the mandate for making sure this is a functioning city and you can get around it properly. And no, not the case. What the case is that we have boondoggle construction projects that take 10 to 20 years to complete that are $12 billion over budget and them selling greenbelt space to developer friends to build more houses. It's just,
I think that's the thing, sitting here being 33 and then just going through the election cycle that we went through in Canada, and the realization that like 4 years is a fucking long time.
It's
and
so
just like,
long. Yeah.
Like, so I think both of us are basically sitting here going, we've just punted the next 4 years. Like, our cities are not getting better for the next 4 years at least. And then you're going to hope for a change of government, which is like, what? At best, a crapshoot. And then at best, you're also going to get an example of whether or not any of these people that are going to get elected are going to do anything quickly enough. So you're looking at, 5-6 years before you're seeing legitimate change. It's just like, it's enough to make you just sigh and go like, maybe I'll just go somewhere else. Like, this kind of just sucks, right? Like, no one's trying to make anything better.
Well, in our case, that meant a lot of people just simply didn't vote, at least for the provincial one. And I think, I know people will lash out at people who haven't voted, but the other options presented, especially, my God, in Ontario, it was just absolutely atrocious. Absolutely atrocious.
It sucks, man. Like, I think we have both been fairly outspoken on this issue in regards to municipal politics, but like, just the knowledge that 7% of the population of Vancouver voted for an absolute nutcase party who won a complete majority. Like, they managed to mobilize 50,000 people out of a city of 700,000 and got a complete majority. And now, like, the complete rest of the city doesn't get anything good. Like, they basically get nothing for the next 4 years. So no progress on climate change, no making the bus timetables better, no making public transit better, no improving like anything that's no improvement in housing, no rent caps, none of this stuff that will actually benefit people. And you just look at it and go like, Fucking hell. Like 4 years, really? We have to wait that long before we get anything else out of this?
It's grim, but I choose to end on a positive note before we wrap up, Bush. What have you learned? What have you learned this year? What has helped you on this journey that maybe you didn't know before that you do know now that has changed your outlook for the better?
I mean, I think the ADHD diagnosis really helped in that regard. Like having no real idea, honestly. Like I was sitting at the start of the year and like going through the process and then chatting to a doctor, being referred, going through all this stuff. And then you end up in a scenario where someone's like talking through you a process and saying like, oh, you know, these areas that you keep making mistakes on or like that you keep struggling with. Yeah, that's we can explain that. Like, and we can give you some ways of helping you in improving in those areas. And it's really validating, honestly. It's really nice to be able to have someone sit down and say like, you know, this area here, if you do this stuff instead, or like if you thought about it in this way, or like if you talk to your company like this and tell them that you need to work in a certain way, like that's really going to help you. So I think that's like one of the biggest things that I took away from this year, which is just like getting more in tune with your own brain and the way that you function. And I know not everyone has that as a diagnosis, but like I think we can all learn a bit more about ourselves and try and be a bit more transparent with not just work but the people around us, and I think that really genuinely does help. That's
a great point. I mean, yeah, like honesty in that regard goes a long way, because I think I don't know if this is something that maybe has changed for the better based on the last few years we've had, but I think people are a lot more truthful, I think, in what's going on with them or when they need help. Or truthful is the wrong word, but I think they're more forthcoming now, because I think it's clearly not an individual thing that's going on here for a lot of people. This is something that is I think more common than we like to admit, but admitting it has been perceived as a lack of strength or maybe even weakness before. But that's awesome. That's awesome to hear, sir.
What's yours? What's your biggest thing?
I don't know. I've been thinking about it. Basically when I saw the question in our rundown, but
I mean, at least your jaw is not wired shut at this point.
Yeah, I think that's my personal best moment is getting to move on from that and experience the things that, yeah, like I said, I was in a very, very dark place in November and December of last year, and
I mean, understandably so, Dan.
Yeah,
it's got to be said. Like, it's not a nice thing to have happen to you.
Yeah, but I remember being thankful, but also mad, you know, like super mad that it happened, and not being able to get over that for a while, and lamenting it, and I would say I'm not 100% back to better yet, and I think there's some things that I might never regain really the same that were once there, and I think that's something that I'm still probably having. I'm going through it in terms of coming to grips with it, but I do think I'm in a better place in that regard. And I honestly, I think it's based on the people I know and my friends and family for being there for me and being able to meet my partner and spend so much wonderful time with her and travel and realize that there's obviously a road forward for me here. And it just because it won't be exactly the same as before, that's not a bad thing either, because I think it gave me a chance to start again.
Well, that's really nice to hear. It is genuinely really nice to hear. I feel like the thing that I should probably just say above everything else, like the thing I've learned this year is if you can and you have an option to do it, just go to therapy. It really helps. Like it's
for real.
It's really good. It helps a lot. So if you're fortunate enough to have the money to do it, or your work can cover you in some capacity, yeah, please go. It's pretty damn good overall.
Shall we close with the 2 challenges remaining? I guess, do we still do this with the whole episode being 2 challenges remaining, or do we pick now one final?
I was going to ask you a different question just to close, because we've podcasted together, 5 years now? Mm-hmm. Has it been 5 years? Is it really that long?
2017, yeah, that sounds about right, 2017.
2017.
Wow,
so,
sir.
I mean, we sort of had this wild idea that I wanted to get back into broadcasting, right? Because I think I missed it from my BBC days. I think you kind of just wanted to have a creative outlet that wasn't being crushed in spirit by a certain giant company, and also having the opportunity to, I think, showcase yourself as well. Like can continue to show the world that you are still and still absolutely are a really talented broadcaster. I think the question that I always find fun to ask is like, why do you still enjoy doing this? Like what about podcasting and what about doing this show do you still enjoy?
Ooh, good question.
It's not in the notes, dude. You're gonna have to figure this out on the spot.
It's not in the notes. I know. I think I forged a few wonderful relationships through this medium, and I don't just mean with you, who I'm a big fan of as well, Simon, and I love you dearly. But I think I relish the opportunity to reach people talking about the things I love and kind of coalescing around a massive moment or gathering around a massive tournament and enjoying it together, and then having maybe my words mean something to someone. I've always relished that feeling, and I think having this outlet is something that I expected to take for granted at some point along the way. And I think there's been for sure weeks where I'm like, oh God, like I don't know what to say, or I have nothing to talk about, and I could use a break just like anyone. But I feel like I take this, I can't take it for granted, because I'm lucky to be able to do it. I'm lucky to have anyone kind of tune in to listen to this. And I'm lucky to have people who I forge strong bonds with who are wanting to do the same thing and talk about the same thing, or talk about these events and come on our show and work on our show and make awesome edits and make this show sound great. And it's everyone from Greg to Dylan to Clay to yourself as well, Bush, and all the guests we've had on as well. Like it's a lot of teamwork involved, and I think that aspect as well is something I really love.
It's a good one. It's almost like you wrote that. Can I just say what he said as well? Am I allowed to just do that as a get out of jail clause on this one, so I don't have to come up with my own answer? Because I basically agree with every single part of that. I think I still believe in it as a medium. It's interesting of how when we started 5 years ago, it was still on that point where it was just about becoming saturated. I think it was maybe in the early stage of saturation, if you will. And now you look at it in 2022 and you're like, literally everyone has a podcast, and it's got almost memed to this point of the kind of people that go into podcasting and the kind of thing that it's become as a medium in general. So I still believe in it as an idea though, because I'm sure I've told this story before, but like I grew up with the radio. There was a reason that I wanted to go and work for the BBC, is because I grew up listening to the radio and listening to sport on the radio. So it's kind of cool to see and hear your journey as well, that you got to fulfill a lifelong sort of ambition to be on those stations as well that you grew up and listened to. I've kind of got there. Maybe one day I'll go back to it, but I think in the meantime, this is a pretty damn good second place, and maybe even a first place at this point.
I hear it, man. Lucky to do this show. Lucky to have met you when I did and put the Sport Chronicle plan together, and then Open Era together, and again doing this across the country and now across a damn ocean. So technology, woo, it's crazy. Bring
back the Sport Chronicle. Jesus, I don't think people realized how much work every single one of those episodes was. It took me like 4 hours to write the notes.
It was a lot of time, yeah,
for a single episode.
I'm sure that some new AI program can just create the notes for us, right? I'm sure this is the hellscape we'll enter into now.
That's not a bad idea, man. We should do that.
See what it sounds like, yeah. All right, shall we call it?
Let's call it for this holiday season. I guess in closing from me before we do our regular rundown, just thanks to everyone for listening. It's been a fun and wild year, really. The tennis calendar has been more fun sometimes off the court for some of the ridiculousness that we've seen and heard, but there's been some great tennis as well during the course of the season. I've had an absolute blast talking about it. And I guess a particular shout out to our Discord community, because we have so much fun within that server, chatting of all the nonsense that happens during the course of the year. In the big moments, obviously, that you get the chance to have a bunch of people all like-minded chatting about a particular match or a particular event that's happening, and that's really, really fun. But just more than that, I think, of just some really good people and getting the chance to know them a bit better during the course of this year it's been really nice. So thank you.
It's well said, Bush. And I'll say, even when we don't agree on there, I think it's interesting because I learn quite a bit, and it challenges some of my current views because we're learning new stuff every day, and it's truly a wonderful group of people on there, and you guys help us keep going. So thank you so much to that community. And while I'm here talking about them, you can join them. You could be like our wonderful Discord community and join us on patreon.com/open era. If you join us there, you get the show ad free. You get it early on Sundays, and you get access to that Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time. We're also on Twitter @OpenAirPod, and a rating or review wherever you get this podcast would be wonderful. We had really strong week, the Iga Świątek look back, Bush. I think we could get honored in Poland. We should have a trip to Warsaw on the docket, because that was really great numbers to see, and to see how many people listened to that episode. But the Iga Hive is extremely strong. I also want to shout out a new patron, Kathy Murphy, who just joined the squad. Thank you so much to Kathy for supporting the show, helping us get this show produced and get it out every week. So major thank you to Kathy, and a happy holidays to you and everyone else. For producer Greg on the ones and twos, for all of his work this year. Truly, Greg, working around our insane schedules and doing what he does to make the show sound great. Massive thanks to him. Massive thanks to Dylan and Clay as well. And thank you to all of you for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next year.